Hello and a very big welcome to Festival of the Child, a global online summit empowering parents and educators to help children thrive. I'm just thrilled to welcome you here. Whether you're joining us here on the live broadcast or listening in on the replays, the fact that you're here tells me that you care passionately about your children. Over the course of these 7 days, we will be listening to transformative conversations with teachers, educators, psychologists, storytellers, and many more wonderful human beings, each deeply committed to exploring how can we raise the next generation in order for them to truly thrive. My name is Priya Matani. I'm the creator and producer of Festival of the Child and your host for this series. Our mission is to empower you as you support your child to grow up to be happy, healthy, confident young people full of hope for the future. Welcome to our community of empowered parents where your voice matters. I'm so grateful that you're here because it is only by coming together that we get to reimagine what raising children in the 21st century looks like. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Mr. G to our conversation. Before we dive into this interview about walking the path as a poet and how to embrace life as a metaphor, I just want to share a little bit about him for those of you who don't already know him. So, Mr. G has been a veteran on the UK's spoken word scene for 2 decades. Perhaps best known as the Poet Laureate on Russell Brand's SONY award-winning radio show, he's toured the world many times with the comedian, and his work has been featured in The Times, The Guardian and The New Statesman. He's presented several radio series, Bespoken Word, Rhyme and Reason and Poetic Justice, all on BBC Radio 4, the latter of which focused on the extensive rehabilitation work that he does in prisons. He's currently an advisor for the prisoner rehabilitation charity Switchback. Mr. G has delivered 2 TEDx talks and was a host for the 2018 Commonwealth Heads of Government Forum in London. He starred in the West End show Into the Woods as the poet, which won the What's On Stage Theatregoers' Choice Award for Best Ensemble Performance. He was also a featured guest on Akala's BAFTA-nominated BBC Two programme, Poetry Between the Lines, and his poetry launched the 2017 Barber International Spring Season. Ever dedicated to promoting the unheard voices in society, he runs a series of drama workshops and artistic events called Working On It for young performers. G, I'm so thrilled and excited to be speaking to you today. Welcome to us.
Great to speak to you again.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. I thought we could just start, at the beginning. Like, how did you first get into poetry? And did you have any experiences as a child or young person that inspired you to get into the spoken word?
I guess, if I'm honest, early on, I used to write poems. Believe it or not, I used to write a lot of poems about Jesus, right?
Wow.
And they got published in, I think, some school magazine or something that we had, but they were all based around Jesus.
How old were you?
So I must have been about maybe 7 or 8 or something like that.
Mm.
So I think that was my first entrance into the embracing of writing words in terms of trying to express a feeling. But I've always been a fan of music and especially hip hop in general. So I like the way in which lyricists will portray a point of view and exude a sentiment through the use of very well selected, limited words, and the impact that would have in terms of painting a story within my mind. I was always fascinated by that. And so I guess that's the early groundwork, which then formed the basis of me becoming a poet. In terms of the actuality of me becoming a poet, I started off as a DJ, so I was part of a little DJ group. We were mainly based around South London. What it was is that we put on different events, and in many cases would either have say an MC or a singer perform as what we'd call a PA. And then one day, this one dude, he wanted to recite a poem to his girlfriend and propose to her.
Wow.
And so he's telling us that the next time you have an MC or a singer, can I come on at the end and read this poem and propose to my girlfriend? And so I was just thinking, I don't know if this is going to really work, man. I don't want you ruining my club night, right? So what we figured we'd do, and also we didn't want to set him up to fail, whereby you have like, say, a strong MC or singing performance, and then the music stops and it's all a cappella. So what we figured we'd do is that we would sort of create like a fake poetry night, whereby like, say, 4 or 5 of us would write poems, perform them a cappella, so the audience get accustomed to listening to words being spoken with no music in the background.
Yes.
So when he comes on, he's set up to deliver his poem with the best possible result. And as it turned out, he read his poem out. He got down on one knee, pulled out the ring. The girl said yes, thank God. You know, we pulled a little string, all these balloons came down. It was a Valentine's show, right? And everybody enjoyed it. And so people came up to us afterwards and said, "Oh wow, you know, we really, really like the poetry." And so my brain is just thinking, right, if I put on a night where there is an element of poetry, then everyone who's into poetry will come to my night, not just for the music and to have a little dance, but also to hear the poetry. Therefore, I've got a select crowd. And so from doing that, I then realized that I then had to start writing a lot of poems in order to keep fueling the night. And so I started writing different poems. I think it was every week or every 2 weeks that I would then showcase at the night. And that's what got me on a career, on a path into poetry, whereby I started to enjoy the writing and the performing of the poetry more than I did the DJing. And then the rest was history.
That's amazing. I mean, it's such a great sort of example of life just suddenly going, and this way, you're going this way now. It's just.
Well, it is interesting in the sense that, like, I told this story to a friend of mine, and he then said it's almost as if the what's the word? The My enthusiasm for music led me into DJing, and through that quirk of fate, it then led me into poetry. And so sometimes I usually give that as an example, especially when I'm teaching, whereby that if you follow your passion for one thing, it might set you on a path which then opens up a door for another passion. So I might teach a class and I might be trying to say to the kids, okay, look, if you've got a passion for words and a passion for poetry, I'm not setting you on a path to become a poet. I'm just setting you on a path to become comfortable with embracing a passion. And that way, when another passion rears its head and smiles at you, you then recognize, oh, wow, this is another passion coming my way. The same way I embrace this first passion, I can embrace a second passion and a third passion and a fourth passion, because, things don't stay the same throughout your life. So it was the beginning of a very interesting journey for me.
It's like follow your bliss.
Yeah, definitely. That's it. That's it. Follow the smile, right? Follow tomorrow's smile. Whatever you think is going to make you smile tomorrow, follow that.
I think that's really interesting if we think about, raising children and teaching children and young people, because actually often we, a lot of us don't necessarily encourage our children to follow the thing that lights them up and gives them joy, but perhaps more the thing that will, pay them more money or make them successful, or whatever that criteria is.
Well, I guess that we're coming out of it's like a post-industrial age whereby jobs were so regimented and structured. So if you do sciences, then you are on path to do this job. If you do arts, you're on path to do this job. And everything was very much structured around a job, which was based around the Industrial Revolution, where you would go in to the factory at 16 or whatever and leave at 60 or 65 or whatever it was back in the day. And so, the whole job for life idea, it was so much ingrained within us that parents will then think, oh my God, if I don't, steer my child in the right way, they're going to be stuck in a job for life, which is not going to be the most productive or most financially rewarding that I would want them to do. Because obviously every parent's going to want the best for their child. That's a natural instinct. But I think that now we're post-industrial. boy, we might even be becoming post-digital the way things are going.
Mm.
But in the sense that, like, the idea of a job for life and a career for life and that regimented structure doesn't exist anymore.
No.
And so the only fuel, the motivating fuel, is not only financial, it's almost about how much of a good life are you living. That's why
Mm.
all these things like, mindfulness and well-being and whatever, they're propping up in even the most highly esteemed financial workplaces, because they're starting to realize that unless the people are finding some sense of purpose, some sense of ambition, some sense of deeper desire beyond what it is they're getting paid at the end of the month,
Mm.
then they won't be able to function within that environment. So now you're starting to realize that the currency of motivation, the currency of enthusiasm, and the currency of passion has almost as much weight as the currency of pounds, euros, dollars, yen. And so
Mm.
that's why when you start placing it in those type of frameworks, you start realizing that the idea of poetry and the idea of embracing the metaphor of life and the meaning of life and the fulfillment of life, it pays a wage which can carry you through and give you the job for life, because the enthusiasm
Mm.
is the job, right?
Mm.
How it manifests itself, whether it manifests itself through sculpture, whether it manifests itself through spreadsheets. I met a dude and he designed he did the timetable for the, is it West Yorkshire bus route schedule? Yeah, you see, you laugh, right?
Yeah.
But if you hear the enthusiasm and the
Yeah.
meticulousness of which this guy designed his schedule and the way in which he speaks about it, he speaks about it with the same way in which I would speak about poetry. So
Wow.
he's found his bliss, he's found his enthusiasm. His
Mm.
bliss may not be my bliss may not be his bliss, but he's found it. And it's only through being able to do such a thing that allows him to be able to function within his job.
Mm. Wow, I think that has such profound implications for how we look at, raising children, actually.
No, well, obviously, it's difficult because it's scary because we've
Mm.
had X hundred years of this structured regiment thing where you're thinking, I'm just trying to get my kid to get the best job, and whatever
Mm.
boxes he or she's got to tick, I'm going for that.
Mm.
But the fact is that there's another language, the same way in which I spoke to you before we started recording, and I said there's another language of vibration, there's another language of communication beyond that which you can see and hear. There's a language with which you can feel. And I tend to notice that people that have an air of contentment and they have an air of, like, say, alignment to their true self, they then become more attractive. Do you understand? They become more employable. I really, really struggled before I started becoming a poet because, boy, I had you don't even want to know how many jobs I had, right?
Mm.
In that podcast I do, you didn't mention the Magic Numbers podcast.
Mm.
The guy I co-host with, he just jokes, how many jobs do you had? I had so many jobs because I wasn't happy in the jobs. I was either getting fired or I was leaving. But the minute I became a poet, I found the job for life.
Mm.
And then through doing the poetry, I then have done loads of other types of jobs, some of which are poetry related, some of which aren't.
Mm.
But I think that, like, but it's difficult to sell that idea to a parent because parents want a concrete structure with which they can insert their child into.
Mm.
You ain't gonna put your child onto a rocky raft or a boat with holes in. You know what I mean? You
Mm.
want to put your child onto a ship. And you want to meet the captain, and you want to research and know where all the fire exits are and know where
Yeah,
all the
totally.
boys are. Do you know what I'm saying? That's
Mm.
the nature of a parent, just to constantly care for your child. But I think that, like, if you educate your child with a certain robustness and a certain appreciation to embrace the beauty of life and see how can I add to the beauty of life. If
Mm.
you can try and instill certain values, and these are the unwritten values, these are the values that were placed from your grandparents to your parents, from you to your children, to your children, to your grandchildren, right? I think if you can try and hold those with the same worth as the A levels, the GCSEs, the, I don't know, the degrees and whatever, right?
Mm.
Then you're setting them hopefully on a ship that is built not only from steel and wood, but that's built from a spirit that will be able to sail the seas.
Mm. It's
Making
very,
sense?
yeah,
Right?
absolutely. I mean, I think it's very profound. I think it's, really speaks to values of how, the values inherent in raising children, and like building them up from the inside out. I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about how do you think poetry can play a role in a young person's life?
Well, I mean, from my experience, I find that, I mean, first of all, not every kid's going to be poetical, right? That's just, I'll just take that. I've been in enough schools to realize that it doesn't tick the box for everybody, right? But for those that it does, what it what tends to attract, especially a younger mind from it, is the realization that it is there's a do-it-yourself attitude, which is like the idea that anybody could be a poet because everybody has thoughts, everybody's got opinions, everybody's got feelings, and there is a natural way in which we all express ourselves as individuals, which goes beyond the normal cadences and constraints of language. The way in which we construct sentences within conversation is that we are trying to be understood by the person that we're speaking to. And so that's how accents start to develop and spread. That's how slang starts to develop and spread. So it's like, okay, me and you will have an in word that we use. And so I know what that word means. You know what that word means. And then when I communicate to you and I use that word, that becomes our slang. The beauty of poetry is that you're actually writing something to try and be understood by yourself. And so the
Mm.
way in which the words pour out, you don't speak like that normally. You know
No.
what I mean? Like, so if you take, any of the great poets or whatever, and you put a microphone to them, they'll just speak as regular individuals. But yet when they write, this weird form of construction of sentences, constructions of usage of sounds, of vowels, of consonants, all mixed together, the way in which they place words. And, a poet will fret over where a comma goes or where you know, that one word in a sentence will just feel wrong because it feels wrong, not because it is wrong, it just feels wrong. And you can't describe to anyone why it feels wrong. And then you find the right word and you place it in there. And so that kind of intuitive um, means by which to express a sentiment or a point, that is very attractive to certain children who may not be able to articulate in the so-called correct way or get a point of view across. But the idea that you could throw a scream in there when you want to, or put a pause in there that's uncomfortable for as long as you want to, just because you want to, that freedom of being able to manipulate language, they
Mm.
find that within the rebellion, they actually find the structure,
Mm.
you know? And then I've also got this, like a mantra whereby I always say that whenever you are attracted to a piece of poetry or you're attracted to a certain film or a piece of music or any sentiment that you find awakens you or sparks a little light bulb in your brain, the reason why it sparks a light bulb is because that sentiment was already written on your heart before you were born. So all you're doing is you're being re-reminded of something that you already knew. And so
Mm.
once I place that into a child's mind, then when they start looking at other forms of art that they're interested in, they
Mm.
realize, okay, the reason why I like this is because it was already in me. And so if it's already in me, what else is in me? Do you know what I mean? Why wait for other things to spark this eureka moment? Let me look deeper within myself and see what else I can bring up. And so it's just that encouragement, the encouragement to be able to be expressive for expressive sake. I think that that's the thing that a lot of, especially younger minds, who once they, they're going, to go into school. I don't know if you remember how traumatic that is, right?
Mm.
From 1 minute you're chilling at your parents and just watching daytime TV, next minute you're being bundled off every single day,
Mm.
right, amongst strange kids and strange adults. So that sort of like traumatic experience is very jarring to them, and then suddenly being saying, okay, you got to learn this, you've got to learn this, you've got to learn this, you've got to learn this, and everything's being fed into you, fed into you, fed into you. The idea that you might have something inside you that needs to be encouraged to be brought out, which is the true meaning of the word education. It comes from the
Mm,
Latin root, to, educo, which means to bring out that which was
mm.
already in you. Um, the idea that you can do that, it just, for some children, it's just liberating, and sometimes like the you don't even need to teach them anything. All you've got to do is just give them the license to be free in terms of words, and then all of this stuff starts pouring out. And the teacher will come to you and go, "Oh, I can't get him or I can't get her to write anything, or I've never ever heard them speak like that." And
Yeah.
it's like, well, the voice was in there. All it needed was it just needed to be summoned.
Mm.
And that's pretty much all I do. It's just summoning a voice, because I've got it and I summon it for myself. And so I know that everybody else can summon it for themselves. And then it just allows you to navigate through life looking at it through different eyes.
So it sounds so liberating to look at children in that way, to give them that freedom to find their own answers from the inside out and a space to express what's living and moving in them.
Well, also, you're trying to, I mean, on a practical level, you're trying to encourage a healthy appreciation for learning. And so, let's be honest, we've all been there. We've all been in those school classes where the teacher's boring you to death and you
Mm.
just feel that this is something that's being imposed upon you
Mm.
and that you have got no say in this, right? So it's a by utilizing especially spoken word and creative writing, what you're trying to do is to say, you see this lesson that you are going through every day in school. This is part of a dialogue. The teacher is speaking to you and wants you to have a response back, wants you to have an opinion back. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with stuff like, say, chemistry, biology, maths, physics, there are right and wrong answers. So in many
Mm.
cases, the child will feel reticent from speaking out because they have a fear that they might say the wrong answer, or
Mm.
you know little Jenny next to them puts her hand up and she's always getting the right answers, and you're thinking, damn, I must be dumb next to her, right? But then when you have a class where there is no wrong answer,
Mm.
there are only, I would say, there's no such thing as a wrong idea, right? There are just ideas that need a little bit of work and ideas that need a lot of work.
Mm.
That's all there are. So even the beginnings of, say, a story like, say, Harry Potter, it probably started off as an idea that needed a lot of work, and then a lot of work gets put into it, and that's how it becomes a good idea. So it's just about trying to encourage. At the end of the day, I'm not against the education system. I'm not against the structure of school and the process by which our children learn. It's just sometimes we do need to, I suppose, employ certain devices that allow them to feel that they are part of a conversation where they have something to offer the
Mm.
conversation, and encourage that voice. And then hopefully, once they're allowed that element of freedom, then they don't feel so bad putting their hand up and coming up with an answer that may or may not be right, but at least they feel that, like, okay, I felt the urge to say this as an answer in response to a teacher's question. Let me say this. And just that idea of putting your hand up, that that's very, very encouraging, especially to a teacher, because a teacher's thinking, well, at least the person is thinking, right? And that's all we
Mm.
want. I'm not really interested in turning people into poets. I'm interested in turning people into thinkers.
Mm. Mm. I'm just thinking about my son. I remember once it's not about poetry, it was about art, but I guess there was a similarity in something you said, because I remember him coming home one day having created this, I think it was like a life drawing of a flowers in a vase,
Yeah,
and everybody else had drawn them on white paper, and he
yeah,
was the only one in the class who decided to do it on black paper. That was his sort of
right.
individual take on it. And actually he's very, into kind of sciences and maths, and not really
Yeah.
very expressive in a creative way. It's not a medium he's particularly comfortable with. But what he produced was so beautiful. And it was really interesting to see what was living in him and what wanted to come out, that he would never have had, that would never have shown up anywhere else had he not been in that.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because obviously, when you start getting into, like, say, the other disciplines, um, there's very little room for such maneuvering. I mean, there is I mean, believe it or not, I studied maths, physics, and chemistry. I've got an engineering degree, so I do understand
Yes.
the realm of creativity that exists within the more scientific disciplines. But
Mm.
obviously, you have to go through so much theory and so much structured learning before they allow you to sort of start playing around with ideas and concepts of how this world is put together on a physical and anatomical level.
Mm.
But and that's why it might take a little bit of time. But in terms of, like, say, what your son did, is that he spoke from his true voice and allowed his true voice to then emerge in form of a picture, a painting, a construction, which was
Mm.
from him. And you were just getting a glimpse and an insight into the potential of his mind. And so you as a parent, you might never have ever seen that before.
No, I
It's
haven't.
kind of always been there. It's just been waiting to come out.
Mm.
And then when you see it, you just go, you actually feel almost a sense of, I guess, pride.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
not pride, right? Fulfillment,
Yeah.
right? Because fulfillment is almost like, in the sense that now he's teaching you something.
Mm.
You understand? That's what I'm saying. It's a dialogue,
Mm.
right? You know, because you can be proud by you can be proud if, like, you tell him to put on his shoes and he puts on his shoes and you feel proud he's put on his shoes,
Mm.
right? But a sense of fulfillment will come from the fact whereby he finds a new way to put on his shoes. Do you know what I'm saying? Right?
Mm.
And you just go, oh, okay, wow, that didn't come from me. That came from you. And now I'm being fulfilled by something that you are contributing to the world. And that's really all it is. You want your child to contribute something to the world in the
Mm.
same way in which you've contributed something to the world, and in essence contribute something back to you. I'm talking on a metaphysical level almost,
Mm.
right? And that's in the same way in which, the analogy I gave about, putting your child onto a safe boat as they sail the oceans. When you see elements of expressiveness and ingenuity like that, you know that there's another sail in the ship that he's building.
Mm. Well, my son was always the one who put his shoes on, actually, in a funny, curious way, because that was his thing. But,
Right. Okay.
but I mean, because I remember seeing that painting, and he was going to leave it at school, because he
Right.
wasn't even going to bring it home.
Yeah.
And for some reason, his art teacher gave it to me when I passed her, and she'd said that he'd left it there. And actually, I remember the feeling, because it was so strong. I was so, like, in awe of what he'd created, because I saw a completely different side of his personality and nature that I just hadn't appreciated. It,
Well, it's the emerging of his personality.
mm.
Think about it. We've all gone through the growing process where you start off and you're just emulating your parents, and you start emulating the adults around you. Then you start emulating your school friends. Then there might be some pop star that you think's absolutely amazing. You try and emulate them, but then
Mm.
there comes a point where all of these inputs and all of these influences start to, in some cases, gel together, in other cases start to fall aside, and then your own glimpses of your own true voice start to
Mm.
emerge. And that's very interesting. It's very interesting and fascinating to see in any individual.
Mm.
I've seen it in performers. I've seen sometimes where a performer might perform and they're kind of sounding a little bit like this person or sounding a little bit like that person. And then one
Mm.
day they'll stand on the stage, and I don't know what happens. I don't know if it's like the
Mm.
forces align or something like that. And suddenly a different voice comes from them. And you just go, wow, I taught you only a couple of years ago. And
Mm.
I could have predicted what your style or what your poetry would have been like. But now I'm now learning from you via the poems you're reading to me. And I'm feeling a sense of fulfillment, because even though I was your teacher, I'm actually your teacher no more,
Mm.
you know?
Mm.
And I've been doing this for such a long time. I've seen that on so many occasions that I now
Mm.
just realize that it's just part of the natural course of life.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's funny, because I'm kind of thinking about, in a way, we have, like, all those sort of X Factor and The Voice type programs. They're often copying different artists, and putting on different performances each week, and then suddenly there is a moment and they find their own voice and their own unique style, or not, and then they just,
Yeah.
and that's sort of a bit similar, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously those things, whenever
A
things
bit
are
more
done within it.
manufactured.
Yeah, I was about to say, whenever
Yeah,
things are done in terms of like, say, a programming format, then they do follow a format and they
yeah.
do follow a style. Um, and in many cases, not to diminish the talent of the performers, but it's placed along a very, very thin line for maneuvering of
Mm,
such creative elements. Some of the things that I'm speaking about, there is no there's no form and no structure to them.
mm,
They're manifesting from something that is deep, deep, deep within, which has always been within us and will always be within us. Again, it
mm,
just needs a certain element of encouragement. And so for some people, it might be a case whereby the moment they went on that show, then such talent and such inspiration emerges, but the beginning of that journey would have occurred way before they even got on that show.
mm,
You understand what I mean? Like
mm.
they were on the beginning of a journey anyway, and it just so happened that they had the good fortune that the the true voice suddenly emerged on that show, and then we go, wow, we're witnessing a moment,
Right, yeah,
right? But
yeah.
I guarantee you, the seeds that were planted that would have made that tree were planted well, well, well before that show.
Mm,
Do you understand what I mean? They were on a
mm,
path, and that show was just an avenue, but which allowed their path to then be able to turn into a journey.
mm. Yeah, makes sense. Can you share a little bit about what it means to be a spoken word poet? I know you've spoken about yourself as a sort of a bit like an ancient troubadour.
I guess maybe I'm just giving myself more gravitas than is due. But no, I'm lying actually. No, I'm giving myself enough gravitas. To be a spoken word poet means that you are using the medium of poetry by which to express your thoughts, your feelings, and your opinions. But you're doing it in what I would call an entertaining format.
Mm,
So, in the same way in which a singer will then use the medium of song to entertain. A comedian will then use the medium of telling jokes to entertain. A painter will use the medium of, constructing paints on a canvas to entertain. I am using the medium of spoken word poetry to entertain. It
mm,
Spoken word poetry doesn't work in a room by yourself, right? It doesn't work um walking down the street talking to yourself. It doesn't work. It works in a format where there is an audience and there is a performer, and the performer speaks and is hopefully trying to engage the imaginative minds of the audience to tap into his or her poetry and be taken somewhere. You're trying to take your audience on a journey, either on a journey through emotions or on a journey through opinions or on a journey through reflections.
mm,
And so that's what we do. And to me, it's like a very, very ancient art form because I hearken it back to the first time when people would have sat around, huddling around little campfires,
mm,
trying to entertain themselves through story, through song, through telling jokes. And then someone might have just spoken in a very reflective manner, in a very, I don't know, it's a cerebral and spiritual manner, which would have just
mm,
captured people's attention. And they wouldn't say, "Oh, that guy's a joker," "Oh, that guy's a singer," "Oh, that guy, he makes good sculpture." They'll just be like, "Oh, wow, I like the way that guy chats."
mm,
And I think that to me would have been the beginning of spoken word, and it's refined itself over the years, over the millennia, over the centuries, over the decades, over the days and the weeks and the months and the hours and the minutes and the seconds. It's
mm.
refining itself at all times, but it comes from that initial feeling of wanting to express something in an entertaining manner through the medium of your voice.
And do you think there's a revival of oral traditions at the moment?
Oh, definitely so. But I mean, the internet freed us. I can't lie. It
Mm,
really, really freed us. I mean, obviously, I'm from pre-internet. I've been doing this for like almost 20 years. So,
mm,
like, I do remember just going to little dusty nightclubs and dusty pubs and just, standing on street corners and just trying to recite. I've been to Speaker's Corner. I've done all that kind of stuff like
Wow.
that. But I think the internet allowed, there is a I suppose, I won't say like a safety, but for those that whereby that kind of live, exciting, pulsating feeling of being in front of an audience, that might not be for them, but the art form of writing the poems and translating them is for them. And so there is a certain generation of poets who have been born from speaking into little webcams onto the internet and uploading it and then finding their audience that way. So whereas I found my audience going from, club to pub to bar, night buses, lake train journeys, all that kind of stuff, right? And I was built on that era. There are other poets who are constantly uploading stuff through Instagram, putting it on YouTube, and they're gaining their audience and they're gaining their connection. And in many ways, it's refined the way in which they would express themselves, and it's tempered the style of the poetry, because whenever you have a different medium, the poetry that works within that medium changes. So I've seen it myself. There are certain poems that work on a live stage that don't work on radio. There's certain poems that work on radio that don't work on television. There's certain poems that will work on television, but if you put them on the big screen in a cinema, they won't work.
And why is that?
It's just because of the way in which we engage with things. It's just the way in which we engage with things. If you think about it, if you went to a concert and the singer started to give a long explanation of his or her feelings around the subject of, let's say, love, or even they started speaking the way I'm speaking, I guarantee after about, I don't know, 30 seconds, you'll be bored. But if someone's speaking to you one-on-one, they're going to speak to you with much more depth. You know what I mean? And if someone spoke to you one-on-one and they spoke to you in cliches and in the same sort of like long pauses that you would employ, especially when you're on a stage in front of thousands and thousands of people, because you have to employ long pauses so that what you say lands on everybody, you would think they're speaking weird. So we automatically engage in different forms of modus operandi for different means and mediums of communication.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wondered, what inspires you? What motivates your poetry, and why have you chosen poetry as a life path?
Well, life, man. Life inspires me. Life's the best thing there is, man. You know what I mean? Life is wow. I love life, man. Life's good. It's too good. Even the bad stuff is good, if that makes any sense, because it's just it's such a all-consuming, totally absorbing, elixir that we drink from every single day, and that we pray never ever runs out, knowing that it will run out. And I just try to save every single drop of it. And I think that admission, because obviously it's a way of thinking that within, especially we growing up in England where cynicism is a religion, right?
Yeah.
And being sarcastic is a religion.
Yeah,
Oh, that's not really that good. Oh, that's not really that. That whole thing, right? I can't be bothered with that. And I remember that when I started getting into being a poet, I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm actually embracing something that is so passionate, that's so romantic, that is so, for want of a better phrase, arty farty, airy fairy. But I'm embracing it with the mindset of a guy that's raised up on the streets of London. So I've got that kind of rough edge about me. But yeah, life's the best thing there is, and so there's never gonna ever be anything that doesn't fascinate me about this existence. And so there's always going to be something for me to write about, something that's going to spark off a thought, something that's going to spark off a reflection, something that's going to spark off an opinion. And so I'm constantly trying to, poetically engage myself with life and just say, okay, when the good times come, there's a good poem. When the bad times come, there's a bad poem. Bad meaning that a poem about something bad, right?
Yeah.
When the tragedies emerge, there's a tragic poem. The feelings of joy that emerge within me, I can place that into poetry. The feelings of jealousy and envy and insecurity within me, I can place those into poems. These um, are attributes of life, and they just come and visit you every now and then, and they sit down and they sit in your front room, the living room of your mind, and they play PlayStation with you for a little while. They empty out your fridge, and then they leave, and then another one comes along, and another one comes along. So there's always going to be something to write about. There's always going to be something to keep you thinking. And in some cases, wow, I can't lie. Sometimes I look through old poems and I think to myself, wow, the opinion I had back then, I don't even have it now. So there's a constant reevaluation, because obviously when you are, when you're a child, you think as a child. When you're a teenager, you think as a teenager. When you're in your 20s, you think in your 20s, 30s, think in your 30s. When you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, you start thinking in a different way because, you're playing with a different set of cards. So sometimes the thing that you would have written when you were a teenager, it ain't working for you when you're in your 60s. And the thing you write in your 60s may not work for you when you're in your 80s. So there's, it's a constant engagement with life. That's what keeps me going.
My father died in February of, not last year, the year before.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Oh, February 2018. So that's
Right,
last year, isn't it?
last year.
Yeah, so a year and a half ago. And I found that writing poetry was a sort of, and still is, although I haven't written anything in a while. It's like a healing pathway. And there's this one poem I wrote called Grief and Gratitude.
Right.
And I literally poured my whole relationship with my father, my whole feeling about his death into this, a page of words.
Wow.
And I still have tears in my eyes when I reread that because I can connect to how I felt. But in some ways, it like captured a moment in my own biography that I feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to feel, because although all those feelings were so intense, and at times still are, because it's of course only 18 months.
Yeah.
I feel that, like it's a little bit of what you said about, embracing life, the good and the seemingly bad, because although, it's probably the single most difficult thing I've experienced, having experienced a catalogue of difficulties like all of us as human beings. But I'm just so grateful to have felt so much, and also grateful that I took the time to write, because it was like a little, I don't know, like an eternal snapshot or something.
But also in your own way, it kind of keeps him alive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if you think about, our loved ones that have passed over to the other side, every single memory of them is in your mind somewhere. So the tone of their voice, the smell of the aftershave, the fabric of the suit that they used to wear, the little mannerisms and tics that they may have had, the favorite drink, so many memories. They're all locked in your mind. But obviously, because we're so preoccupied with I won't say the present day, we're preoccupied with thoughts of the past and thoughts of the future. And we're constantly time traveling between the two. Sometimes it's good to just take a little time out and completely indulge yourself in one thought, like say one memory. So let's say if I'm thinking about someone who I know that has, passed on, sometimes I might actually just sit down and think, okay, what was their favorite drink? What was their favorite meal? What was their favorite suit? Do you remember the time they used to clear their throat? And I start calling all these memories from every single part of my brain. I say, look, where are you? You're in there somewhere. Every single memory that I have of this individual is in my brain somewhere, and I can call them back. And I'm telling you, with a little bit of practice, you can actually completely imagine them. I mean, when I say completely imagine them, I mean they're there to the point where you almost create a new memory of the person. Like how some people have dreams and they just go, oh, my dead grandmother spoke to me, or my whatever, and blah, blah, blah. It's because all the memories of that person converge in one place. And then suddenly the memory becomes so real that it's almost as if they are alive again. And I've done that a few times. It kind of like helps me get over, because obviously, death is one of the hardest things for us to ever get over. But
It is.
it's it can be quite comforting to know that everything and every lesson that they ever taught you is within you, and all
Mm,
it just takes is you to encourage it to come forth. And so the reason why you miss them is because you need them. You know what I mean?
mm,
You need that little bit of guidance. Sometimes you just need that little argument. You know what I mean?
mm,
It might be some
yeah.
some stubbornness that you actually miss some of the bad points, right?
Mm,
And so when you feel that, oh wow, things are going really badly in life, and I feel like there's so many obstacles blocking me. I can't look up, for climbing over. I can't look down for dipping under, right?
yeah.
Then you feel, I just wish that so and so was here with me, just to offer me that comforting voice, or even that snap out of it type voice. And
Mm,
so if you sit down, cut everything, yeah, cut cut this computer off for a start,
mm,
right? Cut the phone off and sit down and allow that person, all the memories of that person, to come back into your mind. They will emerge, and they will give you the voice that you need to hear from them, which is why you call them in the first place.
mm. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Ah, well, this, uh, I don't know obviously, me and you have never had this is the first deep conversation I guess we've had.
Yes.
But people who know me, this is how I communicate, right?
Mm,
So it can seem very, very strange, because for people that don't know me, they might just see a very blunt person, because I can be very, very curt at times, right? But
mm,
once I get to know someone and I'm chatting, then I
mm,
properly, I like to entertain all thoughts of, you know, philosophizing.
mm. Yeah. I'm just thinking, coming back to poetry for a minute and wondering how can we offer a bridge to parents and educators for this new story that's wanting to be told. I mean, in these conversations we're looking at, reimagining childhood, reimagining education. And I just wondered if there's a place for poetry to help us weave a new myth, if you like, in the collective
Well, I
consciousness.
think, I mean, look, first of all, parents have got to realize that school doesn't hold all the answers, not because of a lacking of enthusiasm on school's part, but these are structured institutions, and the teachers are literally up to their eyeballs in endless paperwork, and they're
Mm,
juggling so many factors that uh, the the priority to encourage the imagination within your child is not within their remit. So to expect them to do that
mm,
is, I hate to say it, it's a failing on your part as a parent.
mm,
But encouraging the imagination of a child
mm,
is a beautiful thing. I mean, like, I don't know what it was like, say, when you're growing up, but I do remember when, like, back in the day, there were certain, like, elders that were a bit sort of like discouraging of that imaginative voice. Like, if you start talking to yourself, or you find yourself like,
oh, absolutely.
what I mean, like
Mm,
doodling, like
mm.
like everyone likes to doodle, and then people, stop doodling,
Like
do
you're
your homework,
fiddling
whatever.
around or something,
Yeah,
not being serious.
anything that they feel is again doesn't fit within the post in the industrialized school network of learning. If
Mm,
they find you doing anything like that that is showing this true voice, um parents tend to dismiss it, because they think, oh god, I don't want to be sending my kid to school, he starts doodling. I don't want to be sending my kid to school and he's like chatting to himself like he's a madman. But
mm,
I think that you've got to realize that the the talking to yourself, the doodling, the weird kind of play, these are ways in which the mind is starting to grow. It's starting to feel itself out. It's
mm,
starting to have an attachment to its body. Because, think about it, you've got a mind that's growing, and you've
mm,
got a body that's growing, and the mind and the body eventually have to become one. That's what we deem to be a mature adult. But it takes time. And so in many cases, the mind's thinking one thing, the body's doing another thing. And then the body starts doing something and changing and growing. The mind can't, process that. So much of teenage angst, as adults, we know so much of teenage angst is the fact that your body's changing and your mind's trying to come to terms with that, right?
mm,
So I think just encourage that imaginative voice, and encourage that passion, and whatever it is that your child has a passion in, um, allow them to indulge in that, but also try and figure out what is it that they find interesting and passionate about that. Because obviously we're now living in a time where, we're dealing with stuff like Fortnite, and we're dealing with games where
Mm,
the mindset of the designers is offering our children reward systems, right? So you do this, you get a reward, do that, you get a reward. And so they're
mm,
playing with the primal desires of an they're playing with the primal desires of a newly forming adult, and they're twisting it for their own means. But
yes.
if you think to yourself, okay, what is it you find interesting about Fortnite? You're okay, you like the characters, okay? You like
Mm,
the idea in which person goes on this adventure, this person goes on that adventure. You do realize that somebody sat down and wrote that. Somebody sat down and constructed that. Now,
mm,
if you were to, like, I've actually done this exercise before. If you
mm,
were to improve on a video game, how would you improve it? What is it about Fortnite that you don't like? What is it about Tour of Duty or whatever the games are that you don't like? And how would you make it better? So
mm,
in that way, you're taking a step towards their world, to trying to understand their world without dismissing it, but you're trying to encourage them to have critical thought, to say, don't accept this world of Fortnite or whatever game you play as being the be all and end all of happiness. Because trust me, it's not going to make you completely happy. What are the faults you can see within it? And
mm,
within those faults, that means your imagination is working against that. Because I remember I was at a pupil referral unit, and I was talking to this one guy. I don't know, he's about, maybe, let's say, 15, 16 years old. And he's addicted to all these games, right?
mm,
And then he plays and he gets bored. Then another one comes in. He plays and he gets bored. Another one comes in. And I said to him, I said, do you know the reason why you get bored playing these games, right? I said, you can play all the games in the world and you'll get bored. I said, you can read all the books in the world and you'll get bored. You can watch all the movies in the world, you get bored. You can go through every single timeline on every single social media platform and you'll get bored. You can watch YouTube all day long and you'll get bored. I said, do you know why? Because your mind is bigger than YouTube, bigger than any book written, bigger than any game you can play, bigger than
mm,
any movie you can watch, bigger than any book you can read, right? It's bigger than that. Your imagination is bigger than that. It is infinite. And all the things you're trying to fulfill it with are finite, right? And obviously he wants to argue against me, but he knows in his heart that
yeah.
he can only watch YouTube for so long before he gets bored, and he can only flick through Instagram for so long before he gets bored. And so every time I'm saying something and he sees it manifesting itself in reality, he's starting to think, "Rah, maybe there is something to this imagination game, like what Mr. G says, because I am getting bored."
Mm,
Do you know what I mean?
mm,
And I also say to them, another thing I do, I mean, obviously, maybe for very young children, it's a hard concept for them to get around. But I say, whenever you engage in a form of entertainment, you're engaging into someone else's imagination. I've seen
mm,
some amazing movies. Don't get me wrong, I've been moved to cry, but I'm still engaging in someone else's imagination. I've read
mm,
some amazing books, I've learned so many things, but I'm still engaging in someone else's point of view. But nothing has moved me more. That's why I would say life's the best thing there is.
mm,
Ain't no movie moved me more than a real life experience,
mm,
right? Ain't no game I played made me happier than a real life experience that's made me happy,
mm,
right? And the same thing goes for sadness, and the same thing goes for any other emotion, right? The reality of life and the absorbing of real life experiences and coming up with real life evaluations that will then help me maneuver within those experiences, that is far more entertaining and consuming than the facsimile of it.
mm.
And so I say,
Wow.
so as I'm saying to you, like, I've,
Mm,
from being a poet, I know it's going to sound like kind of mad, but from being a poet,
mm,
it's allowed me to look at the world, analyze the world, take on board that which I feel is beneficial to me, dismiss that which I feel isn't beneficial to me, and constantly keep reevaluating that which I'm taking on board. So I might say this today, and then tomorrow I might have a different point of view, and the next day I might have a different point of view. You can say that, okay, you're flim flamming, right? Or, you're not solid and you're rock solid in your opinions. But no, I'm constantly reevaluating, right? I'm constantly thinking, oh, maybe I was wrong then. Maybe the way in which I thought then was due to this set of circumstances, but it doesn't apply within this new set of circumstances, right? And so it's to become a thinker as opposed to being a poet. Poetry is the means by which allows me to think.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know that we're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to just briefly touch on, I know it's a huge body of work, the work you do in prisons,
Yeah.
the rehabilitation process. Can you just share a little bit about spoken word poetry in prisons and
Well,
how you got involved?
yeah, I mean, I mainly get involved in like, mainly male prisons, right? And so um I did a whole TEDx talk on it, which people can watch, which is called "Have Poems Will Travel," which will really detail the path which led me into teaching in prisons. But what I try to do is I try to, especially speaking to mainly young men, but I guess it's more older men also reflect. Sorry, it's mainly young men, but also older men connect with me on that certain level, where it's the use of poetry to, what I'll always say to someone that I'm meeting and I'm trying to sell them this idea of poetry. I always say that the most important poem that you will ever write will be a poem that's a conversation between your heart and your soul. If you look at your heart as being the seat of all your desires, all your wants, your needs, your everything, the heart just wants to keep beating. That's all it wants. I want to just keep beating, keep beating, keep beating. It don't really matter. Just give me this to keep me beating, keep me beating. I need food. I want food. Keeps me beating. I want enjoyment. Keep me beating. That's what the heart wants. It wants to keep beating, right? The soul, the soul's looking beyond when the heart stops beating. Heart can't never imagine itself stopping beating, right? It's just thinking of what's the next beat. But the soul is trying to look back and say, okay, then you're doing all these things. I understand you want to keep beating, but there's going to be a point where you stop beating. What are we going to be thinking about then? So if you imagine those two sort of like points of reference where your heart wants the best for you in one way and your soul wants the best for you in another way, and you kind of need a combination of both. Imagine a conversation between the two of them. And I always encourage, especially guys who are in prison, I say, write this poem as a conversation, but I want you to write it with the knowledge that you're going to burn it straight afterwards. So you ain't writing it for nobody to hear.
No.
You ain't writing it for no audience, no stage. It ain't for mom to hear, dad to hear, sister to hear, brother to hear, son to hear, daughter to hear. It ain't for nobody else to hear. It's just for you to read it once or twice and then get rid of it. And so I place that as a seed in someone's mind. And for some people, they do it and they just go, whoa, it got real deep, man. Like, ugh. And I just go, okay, that's cool, right? For other people, they write it and they don't want to burn it. They don't want to get rid of it. And usually the ones that don't want to get rid of it, those are the ones that are going to become poets.
Right.
Understand what I mean?
Yeah. I'm already thinking if I was doing that, I so wouldn't want to be getting rid of it.
Exactly, because those are the ones that already want to become poets. But again, I'm not trying to turn people into poets. I'm just trying to get people to open up a different way of reviewing life, right? And poetry is the only means of which I know how to do it. I know other guys who do the same thing with dance, where they can teach a dance class and they get you to think about life in a different way. Because the set of circumstances that has resulted in a lot of men being incarcerated, they don't want to be there and you don't want them to be there, right? And they want to get a way out and you want to help them get a way out. And they don't want to go back in there and you don't want them to go back in there. So you both meet each other with the same set of desires, right? It's just that you're trying to help them achieve their desires and you want them to want to achieve their own desires as well. So it's done like that. I mean, I wish I could say that there's like a huge success rate, and that I walk in there and I change loads and loads of men's lives. I'll be honest with you. You're dealing with a lot of there's a lot of other factors to do with, especially like mental illness. There's folks that have gone through serious amounts of abuse when they were kids, and they're still trying to unpackage that kind of stuff. There's folks that have got violence as their only means of communication. But I have had a few successes. And there have been a few people whereby I genuinely feel that, not that I've changed their life, I've just given them an avenue to reflect on their lives and allow them to change their own lives.
It's very challenging, but probably rewarding work.
Yeah, definitely so. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, that it's challenging is probably challenging more than rewarding, in a sense that sometimes you got to realize that the institution of prison, sometimes it can infect you more than you affect it. So
Right.
sometimes you can start taking the mannerism, the language, the callousness of prison. You can start taking that into the outside world. And I've noticed that. I noticed when I started working too much in prisons, I started noticing a change within myself, because you become so almost accustomed to certain levels of violence, certain levels of disrespectful behavior, certain levels of intolerance, that when you step out in the outside world, you've got this, huge wall of testosterone that you start, pouncing around with, and you realize, oh my God, man, I've left the prison, but a little bit of prison has been left in me. So it does. There's a lot of self-reflection in it. In terms, even though I'm going there to try and help other people self-reflect, I reflected it on myself.
Wow. It's been extraordinarily rich speaking with you today. I'm really grateful for your time. You're so eloquent, and I love what you said about, igniting the passion in children and them finding their own voice, whatever it happens to be. And I think there's so much food for thought in everything you've shared. And I'm very grateful for your time, and it's been really wonderful to have you as part of this summit. I just wondered, before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to share with anyone listening?
Don't know what else. I'm just keep some sunshine on your face. That's it's a quote from Richard Pryor. It's from a Richard Pryor concert. It says, "Keep some sunshine on your face." I've always liked it, so yeah. Let me just relay that back to them.
And if I know you're on social media, and you also have your podcast that you mentioned. Do you want to just share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. So I'm on at Mr. G Poet. That's at MRGEEPOET. So I'm mainly on Twitter. I've got the same handle for Instagram. That's at Mr. G Instagram, but I rarely ever go on that. If you just Google Mr. G SoundCloud, you'll be able to listen to lots of my poems. And if you go to my SoundCloud link, you'll see the podcast that we do. We've only done 2 episodes so far, but it's basically me and this other guy. And I always say that I'm generation hip hop, he's generation grime, and between us we can solve all the world's problems, right?
Great.
So so it's called The Magic Number, and we just speak, I guess, just from 2 different points of view, and just try and discuss life on a very real and philosophical. We don't go too into the minutiae of philosophical debate. It's mainly based very much on a street level, but we're just trying to kick it and figure out our way and our path on this wonderful journey called life.
Well, we'll put links to all of those things that you've mentioned in the chat and on the video. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to the next time we get to speak.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
right.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was fantastic, and another thought-provoking conversation. But what did you think? We'd love to hear from you. What's your one big takeaway from listening to this interview? Please do join us over on the Facebook group, and let's continue the conversation.